Hey, what's going on? This is the Saturday Down South podcast. I am Connor O'Gara. Will, we have a full slate, first real full slate of SEC spring games. That is this Saturday, just before the portal opens early next week. Not a coincidence there. We're not really going to preview a ton of the spring game stuff. We are going to have Brooks Austin coming on to talk all things G-Day, all things Georgia storylines. And we will end with Pitch Me SEC Stadiums Edition, our first of our new segment. But I kind of thought, you know what? As tempting as it is to preview all these spring games, talk about like what I want to see, blah, blah, blah. It's like, if you're listening to this on Monday, if you're listening to this on Sunday, whatever the case may be, it's already old information. I'd rather talk about what we have seen. So we will do that with a full recap rundown, the pod that comes out early next week. And instead, we're doing an exercise that I've wanted to do for a little while, and I think I've seen it done more so on social media, and that is what has prompted me to want to do this, or variations of this. But we are re-ranking the top 10 2021 quarterback recruits. Fun. Just hindsight. Am I crazy in thinking that I've seen that on social media so much more? Not necessarily specific to this topic, but just the re-ranking of classes, whether it's drafts or recruits or something like that.
Yeah, I think I love that exercise because there are so many guys, especially in the portal era, that their stock plummets. Like, let's look at, like we've talked about it before, like Bo Nix, right? Where it's like he comes in high stock and then it totally bottoms out. And it's like now, an NFL team is probably going to take a risk on him. And so it's always fun to check in at different points, because it's very rare that a guy just goes full like, I'm trying to think. I mean, like Pat Mahomes, right? Where it's like you're number one, you're locked in, we know exactly what you are.
Yeah, I mean, and so it's worth mentioning today that we're not really going to talk about who these guys were as recruits as much. It's more about re-ranking based on what we've seen of them as college players. I think that's kind of the better way to do it. And obviously everybody's got different circumstances and stuff like that. So it's not, it's not going to be unanimous. People are going to disagree with this stuff. But to look at it from the standpoint of like, all right, knowing what we know now, how would we have ranked these guys coming in, looking back on this based on the way that their careers have played out? And it's, I think at this point to have 3 years of a sample size is enough. And it's just pure hindsight. And that's what we as sports fans do best, is just judge things without current context of what was actually happening and just go based on context that we have currently. And that's I think the point of being able to do some of this. And there are some other things, some other takeaways that I think people have once they sit down and break this down. So 2021.
I do want to say too, I know that was a little bit confusing that I said Patrick Mahomes. I was obviously talking about him in the NFL, but as I thought about it, I was just kept cycling back through different seasons that have been played recently. And I'm like, there really has not been a consensus number one guy at quarterback for a while, right? Because of, J.J. McCarthy, Stetson Bennett, like those guys winning championships. So it feels like lately we've had Heisman guys and we've had championship guys. I mean, honestly, going back to Joe Burrow, because, Mac Jones didn't win the 2020 Heisman. You know what I'm saying? So he was a great quarterback that year, but guy on his own team won it. So it's hard to kind of made the point for us, which is it's really hard to find a consensus of quarterbacks.
Yeah, it kind of is. Yeah, now that you mentioned it, even 2020, where it was all Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields coming into that year.
Yep.
Trevor Lawrence had the advantage in the matchup in 2019. Ohio State kind of got screwed, and then Justin Fields gets redemption in 2020 in the playoff game, even though they shouldn't have been in the playoff in the first place, probably because they only played like 6 games. But the whole year to year, this guy is clearly the number one quarterback in college football. There's even debate about Caleb Williams and what that was in 2022 when he won the Heisman, and going through the entire season of, hey, who's actually the best quarterback in the sport? The conversations that we were having about Stetson Bennett post playoff were way different than what we were saying about him going into obviously the postseason at that point. But, he put together some legendary performances, and that obviously stands out. So this exercise is not meant to just drag the bus. It's meant to look at the guys who were probably getting slept on a little bit, and what do we actually value? What do we consider to be, hey, you have held up, you have lived up to the hype that came with whatever sort of billing you had as a recruit. So here's where we'll start. Number 10, and this is all based on 24/7 Sports composite ranking from 2021. If you want to go rivals, you want to go, just 24/7, I guess that's fine. But
Shannon B. Terry, please stop making new recruiting sites. I am literally begging you. It's so hard to keep up with this stuff now.
Was On3 around in 2021?
I don't think so. I think that was like a newer. I don't know anymore, man.
2022. I feel like that was the origins of it. So yeah, I don't know if you could look it up back then, but
they all have a consensus. It's like, where are all these data points coming from?
Yeah, a lot of different data points there are. So we'll go with the composite. We'll stick with the composite for all of these rankings, and it's what they signed as, not what they were throughout the process or anything like that. Number 10 on that list of the top 10 quarterbacks from 2021 was Jackson Dart, who obviously was committed and signed with USC. Number 9 was Drake May. Number 8 was Jake Garcia, who signed with Miami. He actually went to Mizzou, of course, and he's now at East Carolina. Number 7 was Ty Thompson.
Comment about their boy, the quarterback. He was like, I'm out of here. What's their quarterback's name? Sorry. Mizzou's, that's Brady Cook. He's like, oh, yeah, I love Brady Cook to date my daughter. Jake Garcia was like, I'm out of here. I got no shot doing this job.
Yeah, like once Brady Cook announced that he was coming back for another year, he's like,
again,
this ain't gonna work. Even though Sam Horn is frustratingly dealing with injuries and stuff, that is a different discussion for a different time. 7 was Ty Thompson, who signed with Oregon. He is now at Tulane. Kyle McCord, who of course signed with Ohio State and is now at Syracuse. 5 was J.J. McCarthy, signed and stayed at Michigan. Number 4, Brock Vandegrift, signed with Georgia, now at Kentucky. Number 3 was Sam Heward, who signed at Washington, is now at Cal Poly. That's an interesting one.
For those of you that saw me try to hold back laughter earlier, I saw Cal Poly on this list make an appearance. And we've talked about it before, but seeing it, a little bit different.
A little bit different. When you see where some of these other guys ended up, you're like, oh, yeah, you had a Power 5 market here, Power 5 market there. Nope, not for him. Number 2 was Caleb Williams, who started Oklahoma and finished, obviously, at USC and is going to become the greatest quarterback in the history of the Chicago Bears franchise. Fingers crossed. And then number 1, of course, the highest-rated quarterback recruit ever when he signed was Quinn Ewers, who reclassified, signed at Ohio State, got some NIL money, and then, of course, transferred to Texas. Pretty crazy to see that 8 of those 10 guys transferred at least once. 8 of those 10 guys. May and McCarthy are the only ones who started and finished their careers at the same place. With Quinn Ewers getting a private jet deal, something that was just announced today, shout out Nicholas Ayer, there are just as many guys in that top 10 who have private jet deals as there are quarterbacks who started and finished at the same school. There's your
That's
stat.
A bar.
Yeah.
That's a bar. That is how far college football has come in like 3 years, is that we went from like, oh, I'm just going to wait my turn, to like Sam Heward no longer with Washington. We have like everybody flying around in their NIL jets to their transfer portal destinations.
It's crazy. It is truly crazy that this is where the sport is at. And this is just the guys who are draft eligible. And that's how much movement there has been already. This is just more and more evidence why the typical 5-star progression for quarterbacks that we talk about in year 2, why that is virtually non-existent and why it's so hard and everybody kind of has their own path and things change so drastically once you sign that letter of intent. The cutoff for 5 stars in that 2021 class is McCord at 6. So that means McCord, McCarthy, Vandegrift, Heward, Williams, Ewers all signed as 5-star recruits in the composite. Dart was the number 10 quarterback, and then he was 69 overall in that 2021 class. I would say, Will, maybe you'll disagree with this. I think there are 3 groups within that top 10.
Okay.
I think there are the hits like Ewers, Williams, McCarthy, May, and Dart. That's half the group. Half the group right there in that top 10 hits.
Yeah.
Probably varying degrees of hits, but I would all say, yes, you have turned out to be at least a good college football player. There are the misses. Heward, probably Garcia, and I'm not just saying that because he ghosted me like 4 years ago when I was about to do a story on him. Happens to me all the time. I'm very, very used to that at this point in the game. So I'm not holding that against the kid. Who knows? Maybe he's going to end up being good, but he hasn't gotten that opportunity yet. So there's that. And then there is the more defined, let's wait and see how 2024 plays out. Much more of this feeling that 2024 is going to really determine whether or not these guys are hits or misses. That group among the top 10 is Vandegrift, McCord, and Thompson, who all just transferred and should be their team's respective starters. Obviously, McCord already has the starting experience at Ohio State, but
Boy,
maybe
does he.
He does. He very much does.
Bless his heart. He was out there starting games for them.
You know, it's tough because it is the Ohio State quarterback standard, and it's so unbelievably high. But then you could play the other side of it and say, well, dude, you're throwing a Marvin Harrison Jr., all right? Who wouldn't want to be able to do that? Maybe we'll get a better idea of whether or not he's a standout guy based on how he looks at Syracuse. As weird as that sounds, you kind of isolate some of those variables. A little bit tough year one head coach. We'll wait and see how that all turns out. But just still a little bit kind of more wait and see than I feel better saying that than I do definitively saying that he was a miss. So I'll just leave it in that spot. I'll be kind. I'm going to try and be kind. I'm trying to be generous for a specific reason here. You could put Garcia in that spot as well. I totally get that of the let's wait and see how 2024 plays out. But he's on his third school, and he was third on that Mizzou depth chart behind Sam Horn this year. So a little bit different than even Vandegrift, who it's like, all right, he's behind Carson Beck. Carson Beck was awesome, stayed healthy all year. Before that, obviously behind Carson Beck, behind Stetson Bennett IV. We get it. I think you'd look at the hits and say Quinn Ewers might not have lived up to his number one quarterback in the 24/7 sports rankings era levels of good, but the guy just led Texas to its best season in 14 years. He's one of the five best returning quarterbacks in the sport. And if he's not, he's really close to it. You're probably in the minority if you leave him out of that group. And, you know, so I think there's still a lot that leads us to say this guy turned out to be a very, very good player. Caleb Williams, no issue with him being number 2 overall in that class. That checks out. That's perfectly fine. Again, my unbiased opinion on that. McCarthy, I think McCarthy followed the most, here's the best way to say this. McCarthy followed the path that most fans think their 5-star quarterback is going to follow, right?
Yes.
That's tease the fan base year one, and all Michigan fans are like, hey, I know Cade McNamara is, you know, he's doing well, but wait until we get this J.J. McCarthy kid in there. I don't think it makes a difference in that Georgia game, but it still was you know, being floated out there like that. He got into some of these games and looked pretty good. Then he was really good in year 2, and then year 3 he wins a national title. Even though his role wasn't the same as some of these other guys on this list, he still ends up being considered what Jim Harbaugh was saying, like the best Michigan player ever. I mean, yeah, lived up to whatever sort of number 5 quarterback in the class recruiting ranking that he had coming in. I think we can safely say that, can we not?
Yes, and I will say this too, right? Not to split hairs here, but I love that distinction of what you exactly just said, right? Which is that, you know, going back to our conversation last week about wide receivers, there is functionally, I think you could say May fits this too, but McCarthy is the guy who genuinely lived up to everything recruits thought he would be. And that makes me think a couple of things. Number one, I want to go back and look at the Kyle McCord, JJ McCarthy smack talk between Ohio State and Michigan fans. Old Takes Exposed needs to do a segment on that because results-wise, it's not close. I mean, we're talking about a guy that never won this division of the Big Ten, right, in Kyle McCord. Second part of that is, I would say, you know, there are only 2 guys on this list, as you said, that didn't transfer. Now, it took me a minute because I had to go make sure how many members of Luke May's family, or sorry, how many members of Drake May's family
including
played
Luke
at
May.
UNC. Yes, exactly. There are 3 of them, right? His brothers, Luke and Bo, and his dad, Mark, who played quarterback at UNC. So we have one guy who would have been shunned from Thanksgiving if he transferred. Then we have another guy who is being mocked in the top 5 of the NFL draft because he didn't transfer. And those are your 2 guys that didn't transfer. There are quotes coming out every day about Jason McCarthy. He's built different. He played at Michigan and didn't leave. This is crazy. Yeah, and like, that's where we're at.
That is where we're at. Where he feels unique.
Yeah.
Very unique. And you could think kind of what you want about McCarthy. I think I'm somewhere in the middle. I do think he's more of a project than like a first day starter, which is looking like, at least at this point, if all these rumors about him with the Vikings or the Broncos are true, if if that ends up being the case and he gets, drafted to be a day one starter, I'd be like, I'm a little bit more concerned about that. But I do think that him as a project is there. Yeah. It'll just be interesting to the way that his career plays out. But like at this point, it's kind of okay. He's done enough in that regard to at least show that he was worthy of the hype that he was getting as a 5-star recruit. This guy that Michigan does not get the 5-star quarterback recruits. That's what people don't really talk about as much.
Right.
They got the Ryan Malletts of the world back in the day, but a little bit different. Yeah, Shea Patterson, different because he was a transfer, so it's like a little bit different. But you're right. I mean, like that hasn't necessarily been their norm. And Michigan fans who talked probably a lot of smack before that Ohio State game, saying like, "We got the guy, you guys don't." Yeah, they felt justified. They felt like our guy looked the part, and look, he was rated ahead of him as a recruit. So who's to say? So Drake May, he had a.
Let me ask you one more question. I'm so sorry. There's no one on this list that you're out on, right? Is there? Like, is there anyone that you're just like, I think that guy's boat has sailed?
Sam Heward,
right.
Jake Garcia, the misses. I am not holding my breath on them. Okay. If they have a moment in which you could just close your eyes and picture a story in The Athletic about their wild path that they had to get to this point in year 4 of their college career. And, oh, look at them. They're putting up big numbers at a small school. You could totally see that. And I hope that for them. I am not anticipating something like that at this point of their careers.
It looks like, them doing a Sports Center segment a la Bo Nix with their whole family saying, we got together, we prayed on it. Like, it would really take a football miracle as it did with Bo Nix to get those guys. So that's all I was going to say is maybe a tier on top for the guys who stayed, maybe a tier on the bottom for guys that you just think are done with. But I think overall everything makes sense.
Bo would have been a weird person to put in this group because those first 3 years, you definitely couldn't have done the wait and see another year when you 3 years starting at an SEC level. But at the same time, was he the guy that Auburn fans hoped he would be? No, he was not. Was he the guy that Oregon fans hoped he could be? Absolutely, zero doubt whatsoever. So it all depends on what you would make that cutoff for him. But we know with Drake May, the story was kind of a similar sort of rise that JJ McCarthy had, where year 1 he's in this spot where you're backing up Sam Howell. The team success with him was not there in the same way that it was like with the JJ McCarthy, but there was this hope that he was going to be the quarterback in waiting as Sam Howell was taking a million hits during that 2021 season. It was so bad to watch that offensive line try and protect for him. But he ends up still having this great 2-year run as a starter and becomes one of the best quarterbacks in college football, one of the top draft prospects, probably going to be one of the first 3 picks in the NFL draft unless something crazy happens. He's underrated looking back. We can
Unless we find out that JJ McCarthy was an Eagle Scout.
What if we find out that JJ? What?
If we find out JJ McCarthy is,
I'm talking about.
I know. If we find out JJ McCarthy is an Eagle Scout, that's going to push him up above Jake May.
Good Lord.
That's all he can do is just community service because that's what's working for him.
I guess. I don't know. He's got some people in his corner, very much. But so Drake May is underrated in this class. Okay, he's underrated at 9th. Same with Jackson Dart. Jackson Dart is underrated at 10 looking back because you're not ranking the 10 best quarterbacks in 2024 and leaving out Jackson Dart. He's closer to top 5 than he is like, this guy's not even in the top 20. Jackson Dart is really good, somebody that I've come around on and means a lot for that Ole Miss program, as we talked about when Michael Katz came on. So speaking of that, next draft day, let's draft quarterbacks for 2024. Let's do that for next draft day that we do, which will be the first Thursday pod of 2024, or the first of May of 2024. So that'll be like post actual NFL draft. Let's do that because I think Dart is an interesting person as we look at that. So that'll be our next topic, a little teaser for the people. You're not leaving any of the hits out of a revised top 10, a re-ranking of the top 10. The hits are all making that. You're cutting the misses. So Garcia and Heward, those guys are out. You would probably also have to cut the wait and see until after 2024 guys. So let's start with the hits to fill out our re-ranking the top 10. And this is based on who they were as college quarterbacks, not necessarily how they project at the next level, stuff like that. We'll let other people figure that stuff out. This is talking about who they have been as college players. Key distinction there. I would go, let's just start at number one because that's obvious, and then we'll work our way to the back. So let's start with number one, Caleb Williams, won a Heisman Trophy. Drake May, I would put at number two, a little bit controversial because a lot of people would have J.J. McCarthy in that spot. I would instead have J.J. McCarthy at number three. I would put Quinn Ewers at 4, and I would put Jackson Dart at 5. Any disagreement when you hear those 5?
As a college player, man, I like Drake May a lot. Me personally,
same.
This is my crazy thought. I might take Drake May over Caleb Williams just because something scares me about him. About Caleb Williams, and that's not any type of innuendo or anything. Some of the quotes that have come out about him, just wanting ownership stake and that type of stuff. That I know it's as a prospect, but you don't just wake up and decide that one day.
That stuff was overblown. That wasn't actually. That was like a rumor that gets thrown out there that he didn't actually come out and say that he wanted ownership stake. That's like
I forgot the PR machine for the first round draft pick was in. Let me just hear me out here. Drake May is a guy Caleb Williams followed Lincoln Riley. Drake May is a guy that stayed there from Phil Longo to new OCs to do all that stage. So I think that we've seen him in different systems. I think for that reason, predictable size, the ability to function in different ways, taking a program that I think that USC's offense, therefore Lincoln Riley's offense has always been similar. I don't think he's the best Lincoln Riley quarterback, but I think he's the best UNC quarterback we've seen in a long time.
He's the second best Lincoln Riley quarterback, I think. Okay. I think he's better than. Yeah, I think Baker's 1.
Yeah,
I think he's better than Kyler.
Yeah,
maybe I'm in the minority with that, but and seeing him start for multiple years probably helps a little bit.
Yep.
I realize that everything I say about Caleb Williams is going to come off super biased. So
that feels about right. As a neutral party, I think that's the conversation we're having. I think Jalen wasn't as great as we remember him at Oklahoma. I think he's right there.
Yeah. Or Caleb, you said Jalen.
No, Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts is fourth.
Okay. Yeah.
Because he was still in that conversation. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. But I think there's your top 3. I think Caleb's number 2.
Yeah, 1 year is a little bit tougher to. Yeah, as great as Jalen Hurts was that season, I still would take the college career of Caleb Williams. So I mean, you can kind of do what you want with that 2 through 5. I think that 2 through 5 there that I just listed with Drake May at 2, JJ McCarthy at 3, Quinn Ewers at 4, Jackson Dart at 5. I think that is really, really subjective because all of those guys were 2-year starters who elevated the program and the standard of the position within that program. Ewers and Dart obviously had the opportunity to be able to do that year 3. So maybe that conversation is going to look a little bit different. We're just talking about kind of right now what we know about these players. I'm not even the biggest McCarthy guy, but his ability to be clutch, that's going to give him the benefit of the doubt, in my opinion, over Ewers at this stage of his career, who, look, Quinn Ewers has yet to stay healthy for a full season. And Jackson Dart, he has turned into a really good player that guys can rally around, much like Ewers. Really similar in that vein. Jackson Dart hasn't gone into Tuscaloosa and won that football game yet. And you can say Quinn Ewers has better surroundings. Fully understand that. You could also take into account some of the history of Texas in those moments and say that guy overcame that. We need to see Jackson Dart be the guy that overcomes that stuff. You could say that he did that with what he did in the New Year's Six Bowl. Totally get it. Love the performance against Penn State. A little bit different than going into Bryant-Denny and delivering a performance like what we saw from Quinn Ewers. So that's kind of the way that I would break those guys down. So before we get to the rest of the top 10, any other thoughts on how that top 5 re-ranking looks?
Yeah, I think we should give a little bit of shine to Quinn Ewers being more of a featured player than J.J. McCarthy. But that being said, we've seen a lot more. I hate to say this because there's just so many more reps, but we've seen more bad reps out of Quinn Ewers. We've seen him struggle a little bit more, and it cost his team, and it sucks because with McCarthy, when they, like the Penn State game where they ran 33 times in a row, that was the right play, that was just the right play. Yeah. So I can't really hate them for calling those plays or calling anything there. So it's tough because one guy won, one guy didn't. It's not like Quinn Ewers was a fraud in that game against Washington, but at the same time, they both elevated their programs, but elevating that last 3% versus the last 15% is just a little bit different,
It is. Yeah. Very, very close, I think, 2 through 5, that part of the re-ranking is. So we've got 5 more spots here for re-ranking the top 10 quarterbacks of the 2021 class. I think you can add 4 guys to this top 10 really easily, really, really easily, because it's kind of a deep class. So here's how I would do that. I would put Jalen Milroe at 6. He is originally the number 13 quarterback in this class when he signed. I would put at 7 Shedeur Sanders, who obviously signed at Jackson State, now at Colorado. He was
never
26.
recruited, so his recruiting record doesn't matter.
Right?
He was playing for dad.
Yeah, can you imagine what those recruiting meetings are like? To walk, what do you walk past Dion in the kitchen to be like, yeah, I got to talk to your son. Got to make sure. You just never know. Father, son falling out. You just, got to make sure that no box is left unchecked. But yeah, let's be honest. That was pretty obvious.
Knowing Dion, I bet they invited people over to their house and just laughed at him on the Ring doorbell and turned him around. You want to recruit my son? Bye.
Yeah. Good luck. Good luck with that. At number 8, I would have Riley Leonard, who signed with Duke, now at Notre Dame. He was originally 47th in this class. Yeah, that's right. Really
Makes sense.
low.
Yeah.
Yeah. You
Came to play school.
Yeah, very much so. Very, very smart kid, Riley Leonard is, and has gone to 2 academic institutions. So maybe a little bit more understandable why he was lower on that totem pole. And then this is an interesting one. You could maybe move him up higher, depending on how much you've watched of him. But Caden Salter, I have at 9, who signed with Tennessee and then got in a lot of trouble early on in the Josh Heupel era back in 2021. Go look that one up. But has done a really, really good job rebuilding his career at Liberty, was just playing in a New Year's Six Bowl. He was originally at 17th in this class, something that Tennessee fans were very excited about. He was a 4-star guy. So far, among the 9 guys that we have put into this re-ranking of the top 10 quarterbacks, Riley Leonard is the only guy of that group who wasn't a 4 or a 5-star. All these other guys were considered, by definition, blue chip guys at different levels, of course. I don't have any problem with Milroe not being in the top 5 in a re-ranking because he's had 1 year as a starter, and he had the slow start, of course, got benched mid-year. But even in his pre-draft season, I think we saw from Milroe that he still has a ways to go. So I can't put him ahead of those other guys. I can't even put him ahead of the career that Jackson Dart has had to this point in any sort of re-ranking. I think it's really, really close. If Jalen Milroe ends up being a better college quarterback than Jackson Dart, it wouldn't necessarily surprise me. I don't really feel like I have to go to bat for Jalen Milroe because I've said a lot of very nice things about him on this podcast and the player that he became.
Yeah, Jalen Milroe weirdly still feels a little bit like an incomplete to me because I feel like his true potential has not been unlocked. I had a lot to say about Tommy Rees as an offensive coordinator. I checked most of it at the door because I didn't want to sound like a hater. I think now we can all kind of see where I was going with some of that stuff and where he's ended up after. I think that this next chapter in his career is going to be the best one, is the best way I could describe it to you. I think that he was pretty limited last year in ways that lots of people did not want to admit because they were winning games, and I get that. J.J. McCarthy is going probably top 5. I get it. But we're going to see him in more of a wide open system, being more of that featured player. And I want to see that. It's interesting to me.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see what Milroe looks like in this Kalen DeBoer offense. And if that allows him to kind of answer some of these questions that we have about, what it looks like week in, week out from the start of the season to the end of the season. And if he can take that next step, I feel like there is definitely still room for improvement there. Shedeur Sanders probably wouldn't want to admit this, but this was his first time starting at the FBS level. And we saw signs that he could be a really special player. And then we also saw signs that he just simply has to take fewer sacks. Okay. You just cannot take that many sacks. And I understand the competition level, and I understand the Colorado offensive line. It's not the same as the Alabama offensive line or the Georgia offensive line. Not really.
Worse than the second worst one in college football.
last year, I'll give you that. I'll definitely give you that. This year, I would expect that to be a little bit different, but yeah, okay, fair point. How about the Michigan offensive line? J.J. McCarthy.
There we go.
J.J. McCarthy was better protected than Shedeur Sanders. I will go on record saying that. I don't think I will get any sort of pushback.
He was doing yoga back there.
Seriously. So I think you could look at that and say, all right, there's room for improvement. That's why he's not in that top 5 in a re-ranking at this point of his career. Riley Leonard, excellent player at Duke, but the efficiency has to improve if he's going to be kind of in that group where that top 5, you could put a game on their shoulders. You could trust them to go out and deliver money throws down the stretch to be able to leave game-winning drives. And you're talking about bona fide Heisman candidates, first rounders. Riley Leonard isn't in that group just yet. Maybe he would have been if Duke could have had one of those like 10-2 type seasons. He still would have probably had to put up bigger numbers than he did, but still a good player that should absolutely be in the top 10 in any sort of re-ranking. And then Salter, as we mentioned before, looked like a guy that had ruined his career before it even started at Tennessee to now being one of the best. Maybe, yeah, he's going to be up there for the best non-core 4 quarterback in the sport, assuming he is locked in at Liberty and there's no post-spring transfer that comes for him. I mean, he had 44 touchdowns for a team that played in a New Year's Six Bowl. That's crazy. Kate Salter. Yeah. Crazy. So then the question becomes, if we have the top 9 of this re-ranking figured out, how do we want to reward that last spot in the top 10? Do you go with a somewhat underwhelming core 4 starter, like maybe a Kyle McCord or like a Luke Altmaier even, who had like some moments at Illinois, but then at other moments where you're like, I don't really think he's going to get it? Or do you go with a blue chip guy that's shown promise and is finally getting the opportunity, like a Miller Moss, like a Garrett Nussmeier? Do you go with someone like that who's a little bit less proven, a little bit more of a shot in the dark based on potential and projection? You could throw Brock Vandagriff into that camp as well. I ask this nearly impossible question because when I evaluate these guys, it's so easy to just default to where they were as recruits. It's hard to move past some of that stuff with these guys, especially when you don't have the big sample size. Because if you just default to that logic, then this number 10 spot would go to Vandagriff because he's the one with the most upside. And upside is so much based on that recruiting ranking. And then do you have anything that told you that this player wasn't worthy of that billing based on the limited sample size that we have? You'd probably say that Moss or Nussmeier, both of whom gave us promising showings in the bowl game after Heisman Trophy winning quarterbacks opted out. You'd probably say that those two guys have to be the major contenders for that 10th and final spot. But I don't know. It's tough. They both stuck with their programs after they watched splashy new hires come in after their freshman seasons. And those were freshman seasons where they both took a red shirt. They could have left and had all of their eligibility left elsewhere. They didn't. So maybe they get a little bit more grace from the fan base because they did that. Brian Kelly wanted Jaden Daniels instead of year 2 Garrett Nussmeier. Lincoln Riley wanted Caleb Williams instead of year 2 Miller Moss. Both correct. Yes, nailed it. Good on them for doing that and not just saying, "Oh, I have time. Why not?" You don't have to.
I love that you said that because I was going through. It's like, well, Miller Moss, exactly what you just said. Heisman quarterback, sat down, played well in the bowl game. I did the same thing for this one. I was like, doesn't make any sense to Rick either. They have the exact same resume. You can split hairs about Wisconsin versus but it's just not like it doesn't matter because here's the even better part. Just as they have the almost exact same resume, they are playing each other week 1.
Isn't that great?
Yep. It's going to be great to see. Because I was like, oh, Miller Moss. Oh, that's the guy that's probably going to share this week 1 because we got to do defense. So that's going to be an electric matchup. And I'll say this too. The one note that's fascinating about Garrett Nussmeier is he's the only guy I believe that we've talked about that will be in one place for 4 years because these other guys were there for 3 years.
Well, him and Moss would.
True. Yeah, true. Wow, that
guys.
USC feels like it's lived 8 lifetimes in the last 4 years. That's a really good point. So both of these guys, would be because they're obviously not. Please transferring in this spring window. I hope they're not transferring. Point being, like these will be a new category of lad, which is a guy that said, you know what, Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams. You're right. I'm going to just look myself in the mirror, go work in the shadows. It's not an insult to me that guy's starting over me.
Yeah, so we can't call them bust. Those guys aren't bust. They haven't necessarily gotten their opportunities, and that's why each situation is unique. They were behind guys who won Heisman trophies. Their coaches made correct decisions based on the evaluation of them.
And they were cool. That's the thing. We don't want to give them flack for being like, no, I want to go start at Liberty or whatever. It's either way, whatever floats your boat. I'm not saying either way is wrong, but I also will not detract them for fulfilling their obligations. I mean, committing to different coaches, committing to, gosh, that would have been Clay Helton for USC then, right?
Yeah.
Wow. So yeah, Coach O, Clay Helton, Brian Kelly, Lincoln Riley. I mean, that's couldn't almost be more different than those guys. So yeah, I mean, you got to give them credit for fulfilling the obligation. So I'm not going to hold that against them. Is my point.
Yeah, we should. This should probably just be a top 9 ranking. If I'm being honest, of this class, it should be a top 9 re-ranking. those guys could end up fitting into the conversation. Let's just have them battle it out week one. Whoever wins that game gets the
Easy
number
work.
10 spot. Easy enough to be able to do.
Unless you throw for 500 yards, in which case we're open to auditions.
Yeah, you know, there's room for interpretation, I guess we should say.
Yeah.
That's probably the better way to go. But you know, here's then what the re-ranking would look like if we just want to do top 9. Okay, I would probably give it to Nussmeier just because the Georgia game was so intriguing. But let's just pretend it is, you know, a top 9 on a re-ranking of the 2021 class. It would be Caden Salter at 9, Riley Leonard at 8, Shadur Sanders at 7, Jalen Milroe at 6, Jackson Dart at 5, Quinn Ewers at 4, JJ McCarthy at 3, Drake May at 2, and Caleb Williams at 1. How do we feel about that?
I mean, I think it's a solid list. I think it makes a ton of sense. I think this is, as I'm looking, I mean, it would be hard to kind of like, these lists are so weird now because there are guys that stay in college. Like KJ Jefferson's still in college. Not that he's on this list, but there are guys that have been in college.
He's on another list, Will. Do you want to do a list with KJ? Let's do it.
There you go. Yeah. It's like, that was my only point is that like, I don't want to say this is a super duper talented list because I don't even really know what to compare it with all the transfers and everything, but it feels like you have minimum 1, 2, 3, like several first round draft picks. I'll just leave it there and we'll move on.
Okay. We'll get to KJ in a second here because he's 2019 class. Will, I want you to do something right now for me. I want you to go and get the 24/7 Sports composite top quarterbacks from the 2020 class. Okay.
Okay.
The composite rankings of the quarterbacks from the 2020 class, and make sure it's the composite. You've got all the quarterbacks in that class. Okay. So you're looking at this list right now. You're going to get there and you're going to see, you know, Bryce Young is up there. CJ Stroud is up there. Carson Beck is mixed in there. I want you to go look on that list. And you know the 3 that I just named, right? Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Carson Beck. Very different stages of their respective careers.
Yeah.
Go through that list and tell me who in the world you would have at number 4 in a re-ranking.
Oh, buddy, there's some choices on here.
You could just stop at the guys that you're like, that guy was decent. You could even do that and name 3 or 4 guys if you want to. It is hard.
Oh my gosh, Max Johnson's on this list.
Yep.
Hold on, give me one. Let me get all the way down because I'm sure Jalen Suggs is on.
Jalen Suggs is on.
Jalen Suggs is on this list.
Yep.
I knew there was going to be a funny one that I was like, hold on, there's an NBA Avi like team headshot of Jalen Suggs on this list. That's so crazy. Yeah, I mean, I feel okay. As kind of like wild as this sounds, man. Yeah, I feel like you gotta go. Wait, where did my boy go? Hold on. I was all the way up here. I got you because he was above another guy I considered. Okay. Yeah, I feel like you gotta go Anthony Richardson.
You probably do. And that is, look, I don't think Anthony Richardson, based on where he was ranked as a recruit, he was not, I think he was like borderline top 200, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And if you look at where he was as a recruit and the things that he did in his college career, I don't think it's fair to say that he's a bust because when you get drafted that high, there's no way that I can sit here and say that you were just absolutely useless in college. Everybody's heard my frustrations with the Anthony Richardson evaluation. And even as somebody that admittedly roots for the Colts, I now have more reason than ever to want Anthony Richardson to succeed in the NFL. So like get it from all that standpoint. But in terms of the way that we tried to do this, by basing this on who these guys were as college players, it's crazy to me that you could look back on that 2020 class and see that much of a drop off. You have your top 3, a consensus, a unanimous top 3, it should be. And then from that point after, buddy, it thins out. I don't know how much of that is just pandemic related. If that factored in, if those guys not getting those reps on campus early, if that had any sort of part in it, that feels like too broad of a thing to say about that class. Maybe it's just a weird class because the 21 class had a lot more depth, even though we couldn't even really get to 10 with a re-ranking and feel good about it without doing some sort of projecting. But the 2020 group, man, I looked at that and was like, ooh, this is hard. This is so hard to do. And think of how many disappointed fan bases there probably were in that class.
Yeah. And I mean, the other guy that I think even makes a case is probably like Carson Beck. You know what I'm saying? And I think that he's
Well, I
good.
mean, Carson Beck's in the top 3. He's in the top 3.
Oh, duh. You're right. Because he's way down here at like 20. Sorry. I was like, yeah. So then, yeah, if we're looking for a 4, yeah, because two of your top 3 guys were like boom, boom, 2, 3, and then Beck is way down there. So I see exactly what you're saying. So yeah, so then if that's the case, I think we have a pretty solid 4 here. I don't know I think getting to 4 is easier than getting to 5. Because with Anthony Richardson, here's what I've said numerous times about quarterback. You got to be a single threat. Okay? Anthony Richardson's a single threat. I was seeing that guy run the ball. And I just think, again, not going to be a hater. Just said it about Tommy Reese, held some of it in. I think he was just in the wrong offense. I think that's pretty obvious considering how he played like 4 NFL games and looked like a more complete passer than he was at Florida. Sure. I think the guy was just probably in the wrong offense. But I've seen him shred teams. I've seen him against USF. I've seen, not that that's a great team or anything, but I've seen him kind of run. And the other part of it is, like, if you're an NFL team, again, even as a Georgia fan, take your finger off that 1-star review. If you're a Falcons fan or if you're a Patriot, whatever you are as a Georgia fan, if your team had the number 5 pick in the draft, would you rather take Carson Beck or Anthony Richardson? That's what I think it's a conversation. Beyond that, to number 5, got nothing for you.
I would take Carson Beck's career over Anthony Richardson's college career. Like,
right.
No
and
question.
Yeah, that's the thing is we're just talking college career, and it's still like this is a guy who could run pretty effectively, and that's what we got. You know?
Yeah. But just getting to that point, the depth is so unbelievably limited. So let's do it for 2019 then. Even more of a sample size. These guys, in theory, could have been in college for 5 years. A lot of whom did stay in college for 5 years and are just now going to the NFL. So the top 10 in the 24/7 Sports composite rankings for quarterbacks in that 2019 class. Here's how it originally looked. 1 was Spencer Rattler. 2 was the aforementioned Bo Nix. 3 was Jaden Daniels. 4, wait for it, Ryan Helinski. 5 was Graham Mertz. 6 was Sam Howell. 7 was Dylan Morris, still hanging on, still playing college football. 8 was Talia Tagovailoa. 9 was Max Duggan. And 10 was the quarterback from Clemson, whose name I think was Tyson Hemmenchum. Sure.
This is a podcast that regularly pronounces hard names, and this is a name that probably more through merits we're not going to learn it.
Famicon. I think
Famicon. Again, we try to get names so right. That's kind of our bit. I'm the guy who has the official Tagovailoa pronunciation that when you Google it, my name comes up. I've never seen a name like this. Yeah. And we probably will never have to. Because
the second you become relevant is when we try and learn.
Exactly. That's what we always say.
He's not part of a re-ranking, needless to say. Hope everything works out for him. I would probably tweak that top 10 to Jaden Daniels at 1, Bo Nix at 2, Sam Howell at 3, Dylan Gabriel at 4, who was not one of these top 10 guys coming in, Max Duggan at 5, Talia Tagovailoa at 6, Spencer Rattler at 7, KJ Jefferson at 8, John Rice Plumlee at 9, and Graham Mertz at 10. That one, we at least don't have to do any projecting. That's the good part. The bad part is you kind of look at it and go, yeah, there's some depth there, but it's really hard to sit here and pretend like, oh, everybody should feel this way about the career that Spencer Rattler had or the career that Max Duggan had, where it was so much based on what he did at TCU in 2022. Like, how do you compare that to a Talia Tagovailoa who set Big Ten records in his career at Maryland and ended up doing just well after he transferred from Alabama?
Yeah.
Where would you poke holes in that re-ranking of the top 10?
Man, you have a lot of kind of my favorite guys in here. And this is a guy we just consistently disagree on. This is just a difference of opinion. I would start scooting Max Duggan down a little bit. I think he was in a great situation. And again, like, he did a lot. He won a lot. He was responsible for a lot of touchdowns. He had that dog in him. He elevated TCU. They were horrible without him. I get all the logic.
If you told second me, the Heisman, Will.
I know, but like, if you put him on Maryland, are they keeping it close to Ohio State like every year? Because I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't know. It's tough. Like, what's that big marquee win for Talia Tagovailoa? You know, like,
he almost beat a lot of teams. He wasn't clutch. So these are kind of two polar opposites. You're getting
So that's why it's difficult to kind of figure that out, because I think you would look at a lot of these guys and say they had a lot of detractors throughout their careers. Once you get past I mean, even Dylan Gabriel at 4. The conversation with Oklahoma fans right now is, hey, Jackson Arnold's actually going to be better than Dylan Gabriel was.
Oklahoma fans hate everybody that isn't at Oklahoma. It's just like, okay, man. Like, I get it, but like, I didn't know. I thought Dylan Gabriel transferring was kind of like a hardo move when he left UCF, and then he's done so much. Like, he's done great since then, and I get it with like the Gus thing. My fault, but like, because again, you see Bo Nix and the direction his career went after he got away from Gus. So now I get it. But Dylan Gabriel, he's a little bit harder of a guy to like if you know much about him. He's kind of got like a sock brand. He's like a little bit Spencer Rattler coded without the recruiting ranking. So I get why people don't like him. But at the same time, if you want to view a pure football talent, he's got it. He's a smaller guy, but he's got a rocket arm. He's a lefty. He's a little bit weird looking, but I like him a lot.
I think when we do our drafting of quarterbacks next month, I'll just say it right now, you're going to end up with Dylan Gabriel.
Which is fine. Thank you for that intel.
Yeah. Guarantee. I hope you don't take him with the last pick in the draft because that would be too much value for a guy that's been as prolific as he's been. But I think you will definitely end up with Dylan Gabriel. The only guy in that group, in that re-ranking of 2019 quarterbacks who didn't transfer or get benched after being the starter was Sam Howell. Think about that. Look at that. I mean,
the amount of time we've spent talking about UNC quarterbacks is nuts. Because I was like, I don't like that guy. He's the next Trubisky or whatever. And we went back and forth on that. But Drake May I like a lot. So I don't know. I've never liked Sam Howell, but that might just be a hater. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, even like Max Duggan. Like Max Duggan got benched and wasn't going to be the guy. Very non-linear type career that he ends up having. And, pre-draft, obviously he turns into a really good player that year. But just the path is all over the place. 8 of those 10 guys, of course, ended up transferring at least once. So this is a fun, kind of depressing exercise, and I feel like I've been doing that a lot lately. Did it a little bit with the Cam Coleman thing, with trying to keep expectations in check as much as possible. But it's a good reminder that not all. It's not that I'm trying to sit here and say like every quarterback is going to turn out to be a bust. It's one thing to say you have high expectations for a guy, but understanding like how few of these guys we can actually sit here and look back on and say, great college career, awesome player.
Let me ask you one question real quick, because again, we got a whole list here. There's a lot of stuff we could talk about, but I will say this: 2 guys that are fascinating to me. I think you probably have them listed correctly, but I'll ask you a question for each one. Okay, Spencer Rattler, KJ Jefferson. Who would you rather have on a good team? And who would you rather have on a bad team? Because we've kind of seen both and both.
KJ on a good team was 2021 Arkansas.
Yep.
It was. The problem is that the player that I think KJ became, or at least the guy that I thought he was capable of being, couldn't do some of the things that he could do in 2021.
Right.
So that's a tough way to look at it. It's actually, in my opinion, the same way that you have to look at Rattler's career. Spencer Rattler could not do the things that he did in 2023 that we watched him do at South Carolina. If you actually watch South Carolina, I know I always say that for Spencer Rattler and his evaluation, but if you watch the things that he did and the ways that he improved, he could not do those things during his time at Oklahoma. He wasn't ready. He wasn't as polished. So it's so difficult to answer. Because I am, even as the biggest KJ guy there is, I am much more intrigued by putting the 2023 version of Spencer Rattler back on some of those Oklahoma teams. Yeah. That's what I would have liked to have seen, is how he really could have looked as a guy that didn't have the mechanics issues, didn't have the attitude issues and some of the expectations coming in where people already had their minds made up of him before he ever stepped on campus, which was a really difficult thing to just process, whether it's warranted or not. So that's probably what I would have preferred to have seen. KJ on a bad team, you could just see him shaking off guys left and right, because when KJ's at his best, he's Superman. That's what he's doing. He's like, oh, I have a free rusher off the right side. Let me just throw this dude off me like a rag doll, keep a play alive, and boom, I'm going to hit a guy 15 yards downfield, and he's got green grass in front of him. That is KJ Jefferson at his absolute best. So I would rather see KJ on a bad team and Spencer Rattler on a good team.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, right? Because it's like we also saw Spencer Rattler on a pretty okay, we joked about the two worst offensive lines in football. The next two might be Arkansas, South Carolina.
Yep.
So that's the funny thing is we both saw them on bad teams and they looked incredibly different. That's the crazy thing is that both of them, they have like NFL size, like they're bigger guys, but Rattler attempting 50 passes a game, but see, that's also dependent on he didn't have Juice Wells for that long. Xavier Legette, oh my gosh, when you say go back and watch South Carolina, it's not to be mean to South Carolina, it's kind of a funny team because you look at it and you're like, why is this team better? Because you see Xavier Legette and you go, well, this guy could be the second or third best receiver in the SEC. If he was like, I mean, there's a game I saw against Georgia, I was like, were y'all seeing this? And I heard him talk and I went, oh my God, first rounder. Anyway, so point being, I think that like these guys have both been on kind of like struggling situations. And so it's a little bit maddening to predict them going forward because, yeah, like I'm with you. We've seen Spencer Rattler on this horrible offensive line go through his progressions in a way that KJ Jefferson really couldn't outside of that one really good season. Then he would kind of lock into, oh man, how have I already forgotten this guy's name? The receiver that was awesome, Traylon Burks. He had Traylon Burks and kind of like looked him down.
Yep.
And it was like a 3-man offense. But that was the thing about Spencer Rattler is that in the heat of combat with bad offensive line, he was reading out these throws. Now, when you have the receivers like they did, because one thing about South Carolina, they low-key had receivers, right? But I think that, yeah, KJ Jefferson, 1-man offense, right? Spencer Rattler, if you get some stuff around him, I think he could be a championship quarterback.
I still would say Spencer Rattler had the better college career. Even if KJ ends up being a really solid quarterback for UCF this year, I would still say that Spencer Rattler had the better college career. We do need to include 2020 as part of that. It's not just what he did starting off in 2021. Yeah. The finish that he had to that half of the season after they had multiple losses. And, you could say what you want about that Florida team that showed up in that bowl game, but the guy was still good. Yeah. I mean, the running game was the star of the show that day for Oklahoma. They just got whatever they wanted. But Rattler down the stretch that year was why the buzz was so significant in 2021. It wasn't just simply the recruiting ranking, the TV show. That was part of it, no doubt about it. But who he was as a player down the stretch in 2020 as a first-time starter was also part of it. So I would still look back and say, I think Spencer Rattler had the better college career. And that pains me to say as a pro KJ guy, but that's why I would still give him the nod in a re-ranking scenario.
I thought you were like, I was like going to disagree with you in saying that, but I think exactly what you said is accurate about Spencer Rattler. I think he was playing his best. Like he was the best quarterback this last year because he had to deal with so many issues. But if you could put this version of his brain into the 2020 situation where he had the receivers, he had the offense, he was playing against easier competition. He had threw 28 touchdowns as a first-year starter in 2020. I bet that would be 35-36 if you had current Spencer Rattler's brain. But, that's through the trials and tribulations. You can't fake desperation, as we learn all the time in sports. So, yeah, I actually, now that I think about this, Spencer Rattler kind of did have a better – and especially with all the hype coming in. He humbled himself. He became a pretty good leader. I actually like him a lot.
Yeah, and maybe I'm even too low on him. Like maybe he does have a case to be top 5. Maybe he should be ahead of Talia Tagovailoa, ahead of Max Duggan. Like, I mean, Spencer Rattler had bigger moments in his career. If you want to talk about the Clemson win, you want to talk about the Tennessee win, he had bigger moments. Yeah,
he sure did be like in a row, basically. Yeah. Actually, let's scoot him up this list. I'm with you. Let's go.
Let's do it. He's top 5. We're gonna move those other 2 guys back a spot. Let's do it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we talked ourselves into it. Okay. Hopefully everybody enjoyed that. Maybe we'll do that a little bit more often, re-ranking things and just not having any sort of current context of who these guys were as recruits. Not trying to like call out recruiting analysts and stuff like this. Those people put in such crazy hours to come up with these evaluations. I'm very appreciative of them, but it's just one of those things that's kind of fun to do now that we have the full scope of their careers and who they ultimately became. Okay, let's kick it to Brooks Austin. Great conversation with him, talking all things Georgia. Dig into a little bit of Trevor Etienne. We talk some Carson Beck things, talk about Kirby's legacy, a whole lot more with Brooks Austin. First-time guest, so here is Brooks. I'm now excited to be joined by a very special guest, first-time guest, somehow, some way. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It is Brooks Austin, who covers all things Georgia for Sports Illustrated, which Georgia fans know very, very well. Brooks, by the time that people are listening to this, it will be either G-Day Eve on Friday, or it will be, maybe somebody's listening to this driving on their way to G-Day. What's the appropriate level of excitement for a spring game when you're a team like Georgia that has legit national title aspirations?
If you're a team that's 3 points away from contending for a third national title last year, I would imagine you're probably pretty excited to get this one up and going, right? I was very intrigued last year after a two-peat to see what it kind of looked like on G-Day and what it kind of looked like during spring, scrimmages and whatnot. But they had half of the stadium kind of shut down for renovations last year, so we didn't really get that gauge. It was like a 50% stadium full, but they only allowed like 60% of the stadium to be even be set in. So I'm very intrigued, like most, to kind of see where things are at and what kind of the temperature of the fan base is. I always say spring practice is a great litmus test for kind of the energy and the environment around the off-season kind of fan base, if you will. But from a strictly like numbers and analytics perspective, Georgia fans have kind of been showing up this spring like they typically do. It hasn't been any what do you call it, complacency going around in this fan base. That 3-point loss to Alabama, I think, kind of inhibited that from happening this offseason.
I think last offseason, this time of year, the intrigue is all about Carson Beck. What does he look like? A little birdie told me that he's put on 20 pounds of muscle, or at least 20 pounds of good weight. And if you look at some of the images that have come out from Georgia practices, you can kind of see that already. Like, you definitely see it in kind of, his arms and stuff like that, which make of what you will. Do you think there's some focus on him, if that is the case, do you think there's some focus on him gaining more weight? Because, look, at any level of football that he plays at after this, he's going to be sacked more than 11 times in a season. Yeah. Or does he want to become more of a force with his body as a runner? Like, is that part of it? Like, or is it maybe just a little bit of both?
I think it's just some general maturation going on for Carson. I'll be honest, I haven't heard of any drastic weight gain, so that was kind of news to me. 20 pounds is a lot. This is a football player who last year was 6'4", 225. So if you told me he's rolling around at 245, I don't even know if I like that. You know what I mean? I don't even know if I like him being that big. But from a skill set standpoint, you would imagine there's been some emphasis on becoming a better athlete, right? I think that's the one kind of area of his game that people will point to and say, well, he's not quite elite there, right? He's an elite processor. He has elite arm talent. He has elite arm strength. He has elite pocket management, all that good stuff. He can see the field correctly. He has elite recall. Kirby Smart's talked about that a lot. But the one area of kind of concern, if you will, around him is like, hey, he's not a supreme athlete, right? I think he might go to the combine and run like 4.85. That's not, nowadays in the NFL, you got to be like sub 4.75 to be a threat, or at least to be able to extend plays with your legs, which we've found nowadays as pass rushers get better and better and better. Your win rates at the pass rushing positions are much higher than they were 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And those win rates are at a much quicker pace, right? They're getting on you a lot faster. So you got to be able to make guys miss and extend plays with your legs while continue to be able to make plays downfield. If there has been weight gain, I would imagine it's been about that. Hey, can we maximize the athletic traits that the Lord has given us? I think that's the priority for Carson as an athlete moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, even Will Levis, now that I think about it, is like 232, and that guy is absolutely yoked. So you're right, like 240 would be huge. Probably not getting to that level, but if he had put on some muscle, to improve in those areas, certainly wouldn't be a surprise. My eyes told me last year that Mike Bobo eventually adapted those concepts that Todd Monken brought to this Georgia offense in the 2020s. And I was a massive Bobo skeptic to start. And by the end of the year, I found myself banging the drum for him. Going into this year, I think he can be a reason why Georgia wins a national championship and not a reason why they don't. You study this stuff even more in depth than I do, so I trust your opinion, obviously. What was your takeaway watching the maturation of Bobo in this offense, adapting those Monken concepts?
Yeah, I think there were going to be some major changes from Monken's last year at Georgia in 2022 to 2023 anyways. I think even if Monken were there, they would have looked, felt, smelt different, right? No Darnell Washington, no Stetson Bennett. And you're going to change that out with Brock Bowers and Oscar Delp. Not necessarily a drop-off. It's a change in style, right, from 2022 to 2023. And then, by the way, Bobo, Bowers is going to be out for 3 games and limited for the rest of the season, even when he comes back. So that was going to feel totally different. And then you look at Stetson Bennett, right? Stetson Bennett was a manipulation of the launch point type quarterback, meaning they weren't going to leave him in one standard drop back set. They weren't going to 3-step, 5-step him all day long. They were going to 3-step him, roll right, 3-step, heavy play action boot, right? That was the style of offense they played with Monken and with Bennett, and that was going to feel and look totally different no matter what, despite the coordinator change. But yeah, man, I'm with you. I think, initially, I don't know what it is about him. I really don't. I don't know what it is about Mike Bobo. I think it's 3rd and 15 play calls from 2007 that have people thinking that this guy's not very good. But when you look at Bobo's history, and we preached this over and over again last offseason, look at this dude's history. He goes everywhere he goes, and he puts up 38-plus points. He puts up 40-plus points, except for that 1 year at Auburn and that 1 year at South Carolina, which – Luke Doty is your quarterback, baby. I don't know if you're going to put 40 points up no matter who you had at the quarterback position or at the offensive coordinator position. So I think the Bobo slander has always gotten a little bit overblown. But, there are Georgia fans that will look at the Alabama game and they will point directly to him and they will say, well, he can't win the big one. He can't go out there and score points against great defenses. And I would point to something different. I would point to the fact that, Bowers was about 75-80% in that football game. Ladd McConkey was not a version of himself. Oh, by the way, your first-round right tackle kind of tapped his helmet 2 series into the football game, and Amarius Mims is now out. So there was a lot going on in that football game, on top of the fact that the other guy on the other sideline, Nick Saban, made one of the greatest coaching adjustments defensively in one drive that I've ever seen. They were playing a 5-down front against Georgia. Georgia was pounding them in the flats, just getting the ball out really quickly. A lot of yak yardage after the play because corners are playing off. One safety in the middle of the field. It's like, hey, we're gonna keep everything in front. Well, they walked that ball down the field, and then Nick Saban was like, 4-2-5, play a 4 down front. We'll live and die, and we'll survive against the run. But we are not going to let these guys throw the football against us today, and that's exactly what happened. So sometimes it's easy to say my coordinator got beat as opposed to saying their coordinator beat me. Does that make sense? And in that football game, the one loss last year, I would say Bama's coaching staff did a much better job than you did a bad one as a football staff.
What's been your takeaway from this eventful start to Travis Etienne at Georgia? Or Trevor Etienne, my bad. I never do that. I pride myself on not doing that. But Trevor Etienne, as a little brother, I can't get that one wrong.
Yeah, I think he's been a great, obviously he had some off the field, issues this spring, but he's been a great addition by differentiation, right? He's a total different style of back than what they have available this spring, particularly. Like Rod Robinson's a 242-pound running back at like 8% body fat. He's built like a brick shithouse. Where you look over at Trevor Etienne, and Trevor Etienne standing next to Roderick, they look like they play 2 totally different sports, right? Trevor is, maybe 5'11", maybe 190 pounds, maybe, right? But super elite from a make you miss standpoint. The first defender will never or rarely ever bring Trevor Etienne down. So I think it's been a tremendous addition to the room from a standpoint of they didn't have anything that looked like him. Even when Branson Robinson gets back, that's a 230-pound running back, man. That's a guy that Georgia fans will tell you looks like Nick Chubb, even though I think he looks more like Maurice Jones-Drew, right? One of these super compact football players that has the ability to both make you miss, stick his foot in the ground, and run over you, right? All 3 kind of different things in the package of Branson Robinson, whereas, Roderick is thunder. Roderick is the definition of thunder in a running back. You got to find the lightning. They have not had the lightning in that running back room since DeAndre Swift left. I would say Kenny McIntosh provided a little bit of it, but Kenny McIntosh wasn't 100% healthy during his time period at Georgia ever, I don't believe. And I don't think he's been 100% healthy in the league either. So this is a very different back coming to Georgia that they haven't had, I would say, in maybe like 2 or 3 years on the roster.
It's kind of crazy to think that Georgia, for all the great things that they've done in the ground game, they haven't had that all-SEC back in 5 years since DeAndre Swift. Now, obviously, part of that is because when he's got that depth, it's a little bit tougher to stand out individually. It's different than what Mizzou tries to do, of course, and they can rely on that because they have to if you're playing a 14, 15-game season or something like that. But do you think that Trevor Etienne breaks that drought and ends up being an all-SEC guy at season's end? Or because of Rod Robinson, a guy that our guy Aaron Murray is saying he's got some Todd Gurley in him, do you think that he is maybe the guy that can like kind of prevent that from happening and maybe limit Trevor Etienne's upside?
I mean, you could say they haven't had an all-SEC back since DeAndre Swift because of workload and because they don't feature one back or whatever. they haven't had one drafted like that since DeAndre Swift. So the NFL doesn't look at their room and says, hey, they have an elite guy, right? Like Dejon Edwards is going to be a 5th to 7th round draft pick. The same could be said for Kendall Milton this year. Kenny McIntosh was a 6th round draft pick last year, 7th round draft pick last year. So they haven't had the draft equity placed at this position since DeAndre. So is this year the year that changes? I certainly believe so. But, they feel way better about their running back room right now than they did this time last year or even in September last year. Midway through the very beginning of the season last year, Cash Jones, a former walk-on, a current walk-on, was like the 2 or the 3 deep in this roster because Dejon was banged up, Kendall was banged up, and then you look up at your roster and you're like, well, daggum, we're gonna start a freshman to start the year, and we got a walk-on that's backing him up. So they are in a totally different place at the running back room this year. And by the way, I think the most promising evaluation for me coming out of high school recently is Nate Frazier, the running back out of Mater Dei. I think he's going to be really, really good. They think he's going to be really, really good. He's a guy that's like 10.5 in the track, on track, like in the 100, and he's a dude that's going to come to Georgia really, really fresh. He has not been featured as the primary back at a school like Mater Dei. He's been an addition to the room. They think he's going to be an addition to the room year one right now at the University of Georgia when he gets there this summer. So I'm super bullish on the room, as are they.
And on top of all that, the possibility of Dylan Bell sneaking back there and getting some carries every once in a while. I love when he, the ways that he was used, and hopefully that versatility is still there, even if the running back depth is there in ways that it wasn't last year. You're a good person to talk about this guy but Brock Vandagriff, he comes into this season as one of the most intriguing players in the SEC. And, I spent some time with him in Lexington and got to know a little bit more about him, about his story, kind of what fuels him and all those things. But you've watched this guy for 3 years, and that doesn't even include the recruiting stuff in the state of Georgia, all that. Is he ready to be one of the better starting quarterbacks in this league?
I think that's a 2-year plan up at Kentucky. If you sat down with him, Connor, so like he would have waited his turn at Georgia. I truly believe that, had there been 2 years of eligibility remaining on his time chart, if you will, at the position. So they know the deal. They know he's going to need 2 years of starting. And when I say they, I'm talking about the Vandagriff camp, if you will. It sounds like when you talk to Brock, I read that article that you did. First of all, tremendous interview, by the way. He's not Will Levis from a physical looking standpoint. I mean, he is big. Don't get me wrong. He's 6'3", he's 230 pounds ish. He's cut up. He's a great power cleaner. He was a great athlete coming out of high school. He's a better runner than Will Levis ever dreamed of being. I will tell you that right now. When I watched Will Levis run the football, I held my breath waiting for the dude to get shattered or turn the football over. I don't think that's going to be the case with Vandagriff. I also think there's going to be some pocket maturation that needs to happen, right? There's going to be times when Kentucky fans watch Brock Vandagriff play on Saturdays, and you're going to be like, ooh, I felt like you bailed out of that pocket a little bit earlier. The more and more that shows progression, the more and more you see maturation in that process, you're going to see an elite football player. You're going to see an elite quarterback. One thing I will tell you about Brock's time at Georgia, there were kind of 2 different days that we would hear about, right? Or 2 different throws even within the same day that you would hear about. You would hear about the times where Brock maybe put a ball at risk or had a ball intercepted during practice where everyone in the building can clearly look at it and say, damn, son, you just didn't see that. Like, you didn't see where that guy was. You didn't see where the play was developing. You didn't see that this was the progression. You didn't see that. And then there's the very next play or 5 plays later where that dude throws a football that has everybody in the building going, God dang, whoa, did you see that go by? Like, he makes plays like that, and he will make plays like that on Saturdays. The maturation point for him, is he going to be great point for him is a melding of those 2 things where we start to see the field at a much higher rate and a much better rate. And also, we continue to be this physical freak that has NFL scouts walking through and tabbing him, man. They have been tabbing this guy since he was a freshman because he has an ability to throw the football that only like 7 or 8 guys in this world have. He has that type of velocity, that type of RPM on that right arm.
let's talk Kirby. He's clearly the unquestioned top dog in the sport now that Saban has retired. But there's been talk about, how much this era of the sport could wear on him. And let's be honest, like a lot of it is speculation. You see him more regularly than all of us do. Do you get that sense at all? Or is this just what natural aging looks like for a man in his late 40s in a high-stress job?
Bro, he's aged like a president, hasn't he?
Yeah, a little bit.
It's been quick. I'll be honest. If it continues like this, I don't see anybody lasting until they're in their 60s coaching this sport, man. Like, I just don't. It is a 365-day-a-year job, and people will say, well, he makes $12 million a year. He makes $11 million a year. Shut up and do your job. Like, yeah, okay. Like, that's fine. I think for me, the approach at the University of Georgia, from all accounts, with the transfer portal and NIL becoming a major thing and it's stressing a lot of these guys, they have seemingly approached this as we just got to get to regulation. We just got to get to some type of, super league or some type of, mass passing of a bill, or maybe Congress will save us or something, because what they're not going to do is they're not going to approach this willy-nilly. They're not going to be out here saying, oh, the game is we got to go out and raise as much funds and pay as much as we possibly can to keep a great roster. Great. We'll just do that. We'll just bend to all of our moral compasses around here, right? Which at Georgia, they kind of refuse to pay high school players. They don't want to do this. And Kirby has even been very adamant about this in front of microphones, in front of cameras. I am not about giving $250,000 to an 18-year-old kid. Come to my program. Prove that you are great. Prove that you will be able to earn this type of money. And then we will find a way to get it to you, right? I don't think there's any doubt that Georgia football players right now are compensated well. I think across the sport, if you have a top 3 roster, guess what, fans? It's coming out of your pocket. Like, they are paying those players. That's the way this sport is now working. But there has been a reluctancy to be the highest bidder on the recruiting trail. And the first 2 years of NIL, Georgia could go in there and they could say, hey, I got a power G on my chest. We just put 17 guys in the draft. We got another 12 coming up next year. We're going to win 2 national titles, all that good stuff. You're going to take a pay cut coming here because of what the upside is, right? We are the new Bama. We are the new, standard in college football. So, yeah, we don't have to pay as much as others. That gap has shrunk, Connor. Like, kids are not listening to that as much as they were 24 months ago. Now it has become fair market value. Like, we're not going to take some massive pay cut to come play for you because we can go elsewhere, and we will take we will take that money elsewhere. And they haven't failed to recruit outside the top 3 yet since NIL has been around. But if you ask Georgia fans right now, they don't feel comfortable, right? They have 5 commits in the 2025 class in the middle of April right now. Like, I think they're outside the top 15 in any consensus recruiting rankings that you look at. Is Kirby Smart the greatest closer on the recruiting trail in the sport of college football right now? 100%. Does he have to close with more than just his mouth and a little bit of his pocketbook moving forward? Yeah. Like, that's the reality of where we're at right now.
If he wins the title this year, though, before all that other stuff, sets in, and who knows what the sport looks like 3-4 years from now, and if he's able to turn over a roster in the same way that he's been able to. But if he wins a title this year, he'll have a title in 3 of 4, which that list is unbelievably exclusive. Saban, Osborne, that's it. Those are the only coaches who have done that the last 70 years. Not even Bear Bryant did that. And I'm sure that some people will disagree with this because they want to tell me about football in a pre-integration world. That's on them, not on me. But I think if Kirby wins a title this year to get to 3 of 4, he's on my Mount Rushmore of best coaches ever, because he passes Paterno, he passes Bowden, he passes Carroll, he passes Dabo for rings. He'd be tied with Switzer, he'd be tied with Urban. But you know what? Tie goes to the guy who did it in the portal NIL era. Probably Saban, Bear, Osborne, Kirby would be my Mount Rushmore if Kirby wins a title this year. What are your thoughts on that?
Joe Pa compiler?
Some would say. Some would say.
Some would say. No, I'm with you. I think, the discussion of nowadays, I like that you turned it into a Mount Rushmore, but that's not what it's going to be. If he wins this year, it's going to be a GOAT versus GOAT discussion, right? It's going to be Saban versus Smart. Who is better? And I compared it to the Mahomes versus Brady discussion in NFL football, right? Like, Mahomes is going to go on to have the greatest statistical career of any quarterback. I think that everybody knows that, right? Hell, he might win more Super Bowls than Tom Brady when all is said and done. But that head-to-head record is what it is. Those two guys played each other. Those two guys went up against each other. Those guys competed for a Super Bowl against one another, right? The same is going to be said about Kirby Smart and Nick Saban. You are 1-4. Like, that's just what it is. You are 1-4 against that cat. Hell, I think it might have been 1-5. You are 1-5 against that cat, and you will always be 1-5 against that dude, and that will be held. And guess what? I think Kirby looks at it that way too, because when he was asked about Nick Saban retiring, he was like, "Man, I was kind of upset. Like, not only is we losing a great coach, but I wanted to continue to compete against that guy. I wanted to continue to try to beat him." Because he didn't have a great success record against him, and to be quite honest, nobody did.
I think it changed with the SEC championship this past year. I think that entire conversation when Saban's got that 5-1 advantage on you, like that's just a little bit of a different ball game. But yeah, I mean, Kirby's legacy, 3 out of 4 would be unbelievably special. Last one for you: if Georgia doesn't win a title this year, who will be the team responsible for that? And maybe let's exclude Ohio State, because that feels like such an obvious choice at this stage of the game. But it's even tough to pick out a team in the regular season now with the 12-team playoff and all that. Who is the first other team that kind of comes to mind that could be standing there maybe in a playoff setting that you'd look at and be like, I don't know. I think they can take a punch from Georgia, and they could be a team that could prevent them.
I mean, to be honest with you, there's a good chance that they see Texas twice this year, like a really, really good chance. One time in Austin, and then probably, you would imagine, in a college football playoff. And they're going to, right? I mean, they're going to have to beat Texas at some point, I would imagine. I think that's the team for me. I think DeBoer at Alabama, they have a lot of moving parts that they got to get figured out, particularly the quarterback. Like, I don't know how to say it. Jalen Miller is a great football player. He is not what Kalen DeBoer has ever prioritized at the position. And you could tell me that he's a great coordinator and that he's going to figure out a way to maximize his skill sets. And I truly believe that. But we watched for 2 transfer quarterback cycles. We watched what Kalen DeBoer prioritizes at that position, and it is not physical attributes, right? Like, Michael Penix went out and did what he did at the pro day, and that's great. And he is a supreme athlete. He does not play the position like that. He plays the position like a pocket manager. He plays the position like a distributor of the football, right? They got Michael Penix. They had an opportunity to go get another transfer quarterback, and he took Will Rogers. Will Rogers is the antithesis of Jalen Milroe, like the complete polar opposite. So I want to see what Alabama does. By the way, like, they have a first-time, like, real coordinator, right? I mean, that's one thing there that they got to figure out as well. I believe Kalen DeBoer is going to be great at Alabama. I don't know if it's immediate, like, hey, push for a national title year one. So we're going to have to see from that as well. Obviously, everybody looks at Ole Miss. That game is so far down the schedule for Georgia and Ole Miss. I have no earthly idea what Lane Kiffin's football team is going to look like in November. And I don't think Lane Kiffin knows what Lane Kiffin's football team is going to look like in November. Are they 8-2 and everybody's kind of just, all those mercenaries have just been like, hey, our mercenary mission is over. We're good. We're just going to hang out. Or are they 11-1 or are they 10-1 and they have to win out to continue their mercenary mission? I don't know. So that's kind of hard for me. But when I just circle this conference and I look at it, Texas is the football team that, from a line of scrimmage base standpoint, has built that roster the way they're supposed to. They've got great quarterback play as well, and a great weapon at the running back position as well with Baxter. So hey, I'm bullish on Texas, but I think it's Georgia's kind of conference to handle. But they have a really, really tough schedule this year, man.
That was the correct answer. You actually did know that was, there was like a right or wrong, but that Texas was indeed the correct answer that I was looking for. So congrats to you. You passed the test. Brooks, this was great, man. We're going to have to do this again during the regular season. Enjoy G-Day, and we'll do this again soon.
No doubt, brother. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, well, new segment. This is the first edition of Pitch Me. We are doing SEC stadiums. If you saw the do we tell the people how that graphic was made, Will? Is that
I mean, I can, yeah. I've been doing a lot of AI stuff for my day job, and so I was like, well, I'm not a great artist, but I know what I can do, which is terribly Photoshop things. So I went through a lot of iterations, and it's up for we're all having a lot of fun with this segment. We could change it slightly for next week, change it every I don't know, but it was a fun little thing to imagine us as kind of like pitch show a la Shark Tank, and then get the bodies kind of close enough, and then just throw some goofy heads on there, and that's my wheelhouse.
I saw somebody say that we're so pro Georgia just because we had the Georgia mascot in there, not Uga, but like the actual like Georgia mascot.
Harry Dog is his name, I learned.
Yeah. Uga probably fits better in the graphic moving forward because we said before we're going to get all of our biases out there. Like Will's an LSU fan, so he's going to try and approach this as objectively as possible. But like that's where his allegiances lie. My allegiances lie with whatever form of Uga that Georgia wants to be able to trot out there. It's nothing personal against any other Bulldogs. That's just the best mascot in sports. So I'm going to try and be as impartial as I possibly can, except for Uga and probably Bevo. Bevo is going to have a rough edit on this show. That's not changing anytime soon. Just because Texas joined the SEC doesn't mean I have to start being nice to that dumb steer. All right? I refuse.
Facts. It's related.
Not doing that.
Yeah.
We're talking stadiums today. We are doing this for the first time. So we're working through a little bit of some of this. We had great responses on the Saturday Down South Instagram account, the Saturday Down South podcast Facebook group. So thank you to everybody that submitted your pitch. The way this is going to work, we're going to read these responses. We try and have some variety here. We want to not just read 5 responses saying LSU is the best or Georgia's the best. So we're trying to sift through some of the responses based on our desire to have variety. And then we are going to decide at the end of these pitches which one was best and which one we now, as a podcast, will acknowledge is the best stadium, or for this week it's stadium, the best stadium in the SEC. Any questions before we get rolling?
Not for me. No, that makes sense. And like I will say it every time, guys. Again, I'm an LSU fan, so if you don't hear me hyping up LSU, it's because I can't. I'm abstaining from this discussion, so don't get in my mentions talking about why didn't you defend Tiger Stadium. I'm going to say this every time because people do that to me, and I'm like, okay, I'm sorry, I don't think Dustmeyer's better than Jaden Daniels. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, I'll hype up LSU when it's warranted. I will dog LSU when it's warranted.
Yep.
All right, let's start with the ones from the Saturday Down South podcast Facebook group. Speaking of hyping up LSU when it is warranted, let's start with this response that we got from Krista Kissinger. Krista says, it's Tiger Stadium at night, and it's not even close. I was in college for the 2007 Florida LSU game. Oh, go back to It Just Meant More. Go listen to that episode that we did a few years ago. You could not even hear the band play pregame because it was that loud. I remember when they announced the final score of the Stanford USC game between the third and fourth quarter, and it was deafening. Then the fourth quarter starts, and the magic of that team, led by Jacob Hester, led the comeback of the year. I think it took almost a full week for the ringing in my ears from that game to stop. It was incredible. Even on YouTube, that game, watching it back, you hear a different type of pitch from that crowd that night. Will, is that the number one LSU Death Valley at night game?
Man, and this is borderline evil to start with Krista and LSU because she does a tailgate that's just first class. It's probably my favorite tailgate I've ever been at. It's right in the shadow Death Valley, so she's an expert. I mean, I'll say it like that. Like I think I was not at that game. I was a child, not a child, but I was not old enough to go by myself. I was, I think, 14 for that. And so, yeah, I would definitely put that. The fact that you said 2007, I thought we were talking about a different game. And I went, oh my gosh, he was at that game. That's the earthquake game. Those would kind of be the two that I'd put there.
Yeah, it probably, that or the earthquake game. It's a good point. You could probably pick no shortage of Tiger Bowls to be able to say this is the best representation of Death Valley at night. Question though. In our pitches, are we ruling out time of day? Should it just be any time of day, which it's really hard to picture Death Valley at noon or 11 a.m.
Tennessee
Central Time.
Fans can. They won't stop talking about it.
They won't, even if you ask them very, very nicely to stop talking about that game.
Tried.
I don't blame them. We can't really – I think we're trying to find the best in any situation. Now, when you
Right.
close your eyes and picture an atmosphere of a game, what a stadium is like, you're thinking of it at its peak. Death Valley is at its peak at that time.
Yep.
I think it's fair to say there are other stadiums that peak with a 3:30 Eastern, 2:30 Central start,
Yep.
where it's a CBS type game. I would venture to say, I think the Swamp is one of those places where it's probably best right around that time of day. And there are certain places like when the sun's going down, maybe Jordan Hare would fall into that camp as well, where you wouldn't necessarily default to that at night.
And I feel like a terrorist for saying this, but because of the kegs and eggs thing, you could really make a chance for Ohio State, which is that they're clearly the best at 11 Central.
True.
So then when you say that, it's like, well, how do they fare at 2:30 Central or 6? So yeah, I think every stadium has the say. I think that the best, again, objectively, I think the best single atmosphere is night at Tiger Stadium. But then what are the other slots? So I think it's worth mentioning for sure.
Okay. So we could look at it from the standpoint of at its peak, which stadium is just best. If you're going there on a given day and you don't necessarily know the time, you don't necessarily know like, hey, we have all this history going into this game, which has the highest ceiling probably.
But there's two stadiums on here that we'll get to where it's like, okay, your floor is what makes you special. So I think that matters a lot.
Okay, that's why we're talking this out. Yeah. That's why we're talking this out. Okay, you knew it was going to have a mention, so that makes sense there to have that at the top. Let's go to this one from Zachary Warden, who acknowledges that LSU is the obvious answer, but I submit South Carolina as my sneaky pick. They are always sold out. Even if they are 2-5, there will be butts in every single seat. It's louder than the crowd capacity would indicate, and they win games nobody expects them to be competitive in. 2019 Georgia and 2022 Tennessee. LSU is magical, no doubt about that, but they are also expected to be in just about every game. They've played in for a while now because they have been a great program for a while. South Carolina is just a place made of quicksand that makes you question life and your season.
Quicksand storm.
That's good. That's really good. Man, you have to have, with your argument, if you're going to be considered the best stadium in the SEC, I think you have to look back and think, man, that home field advantage won us that game.
Yeah.
Right? There are a few programs, and South Carolina is absolutely one of them, where you could look back at their biggest moments in the last 15 years and say, dang, that atmosphere got them a big-time win. 2010 Alabama, of course, everybody's going to bring that up. The 2019 Georgia is not a game that was played at South Carolina. That game was played in Athens. People forget that. But obviously 22 with Tennessee and the way that played out is an all-time unbelievable game. So I think that adds to it. And South Carolina will, when I tell people from the Midwest why the SEC is different, South Carolina and specifically Willie B is the example that I very often default to. It's not so, I don't really default to Death Valley as much. I default to South Carolina more so, and why I can do this job year round because of that point. They can be 2-5. And that place is going to be rocking, no doubt about it whatsoever. And to me, like it's got such an entrenched identity. Not just that, as Marler always says, it's the hottest place on earth, no matter what time of year. That's part of it. But I think that's a very worthy submission, and we would not have been having the full discussion if we did not include South Carolina in it.
Yeah, I think this is exactly what I was just talking about. We just alluded to it, where it's like you got to give this team, their kind of like credit here, because I've been to games at Death Valley that weren't the loudest thing ever because the opponent wasn't whatever, or it was LSU wasn't great that year, whatever it was. But for South Carolina, it's like, hey, like I always said this about growing up an LSU fan, was that you felt so invested because you knew the game was going to be 17-14 and you didn't know which team was going to kick the field goal. And that's how it feels every week for South Carolina.
There's something to be said for it. And obviously, the Sandstorm. Be honest, though. How many South Carolina fans have been watching these Wendy's commercials during the NCAA tournament and thought, is that us? Is that what we sound like all the time?
Getting good. Yeah.
It's a lot. but it's an advantage nonetheless. Okay, last one from the Facebook group before we kick it over to the Saturday Down South Instagram account. Let's go to this one from Michael Dark. Michael says, Sanford Stadium. You can drink downtown in the best college town in the nation or tailgate in a graveyard, bark at people, and watch the newest college football dynasty in person. After the game, you can go to the chapel to ring the bell and then pray that Kirby and Bobo never leave. That's a good pitch. That's a good pitch. And here's the thing that we're looking for in these pitches: efficiency. But if you're going to be like a one sentence type thing, you better make your point very, very quickly. All those gifts that people submitted in Instagram, while we appreciate that and we certainly love the engagement, not hating on that, they don't exactly make the cut to send us a gif of your stadium. But that type of efficiency, I definitely appreciate. Look, how much does it matter? The team success element. Well, like, is that a little bit too? I mean, with Georgia, it's not temperamental because of the floor.
They've been through the wars. So I'll give them credit. Yeah.
But how much is that? Does that factor in of like, hey, the vibe going in of knowing what it's like, what a college town is supposed to look like? That's what everybody talks about with Athens. I would absolutely sign off on that. Absolutely love Athens. It's beautiful. And you get into the stadium, everybody's just feeling good, right? It's not like this. Sometimes you get to some of these places where, like, even at Columbus, I feel like Columbus is a little bit more angsty because it's not, it doesn't feel like a college town. It feels like a city. And then you get into the stadium and it's just a different type of, I don't know, that angst that goes into it, where maybe that should be factored into whether or not we think a stadium is elite.
Yeah, I think, and let me make sure that this is the guy. I want to give this guy credit. There's a DJ that is, yes, okay, I believe this is the guy. Let me get back to it. So, yes, I think those things definitely matter when we're talking about this. And me and one of my buddies went through this at NFL Stadium the other day, and I said, the teams like the Washington Commanders football team / Redskins, whatever, that is a team that has not known success for 20 years, and their fans are sold out every year, and that's really something to me. I think that sometimes it goes together, right? Sometimes there is a place like the Legion of Boom, like in Seattle, where it's like the stadium's horrifying, the fans are horrifying, and the team is usually at least pretty good. And I think Georgia has got a little bit of that. I don't think they're – so I went and saw South Carolina at Georgia this year. It was like my second time ever in Sanford Stadium, but during the curb, like what this is, this part of it. And I think there was some angst in that stadium because of the whole like all shucks. First game with Bobo against South Carolina. South Carolina gets up 14 points, like 14-0, let me be clear, at half. And it's just angsty. They come in at halftime. There's this DJ, I believe his name is Sir Foster. He does the Hawks and UGA Athletics. And Georgia walks out to a Gunna song called Bleep You Mean, if you've ever heard it. Dun, dun, dun. It's sick. And they walk out, and their presentation, their video, their highlight reel, the whole stadium is just rocking. I'm like, well, they're just going to destroy South Carolina in the second half. Like, they've completely flipped the switch just based on their presentation. That, to me, is a big deal. So I give them mad credit to say, hey, like, we're still the champions. We're still number one. Yeah, we had a sluggish half, but you were about to get your breaks beaten off. Again's going to finish with 200 receiving yards, and we're still going to beat you.
I think it's hard to not – like, there's a different type of buzz for a team that feels like it's about to do something improbable, like, South Carolina in those moments, obviously, we talk about, even though they are, in my opinion, one of the best floor stadiums for a team that isn't necessarily contending. There is this feeling that we talk about with Alabama that I'm sure we're going to get to with Bryant Denny in a second here, where the angst can take over easily. And so do you fault a stadium for that, for having such high expectations? That gets a little bit tougher. Can you overcome that? Very few, I think, in this sport in college football where you're supposed to win by X amount of points, and then all of a sudden it's way closer than you anticipated, and you realize your season could be on the line. It's very different than even a college basketball atmosphere when you realize, like, yeah, you can fall behind 12, 15 points in a game, and then you get those two possessions that are going the other way, and all of a sudden, just like that, the crowd's on their feet. It's an 8-9 point game, and there's still this possibility that, hey, you can be pretty special no matter how things play out. So all that kind of factors into it. But at Sanford Stadium is special. No doubt about it. Worthy part of this discussion will definitely be considered.
And I will say this too really quick. I remember vividly, now that I say it, having conversations with people at halftime at that stadium, being like, are you guys good? Like, is this normal? Because like with LSU, our fans get mad. They don't get quiet when the team is playing poorly. They get mad at their own team. And so the stadium gets even louder. So I'm like, I'm in the restroom. It's just, I could hear, I'm like, are you guys good? Like, are y'all aren't cursing out the quarterback? Y'all aren't cursing out Bobo? Is everything fine? It was like pretty polite to me. I was like, cool. Then they got out the second half and whooped that butt. So I think it was a little bit, that game was specific, a little bit more disbelief, because I'm sure that mid-season, that would have been a little bit different probably.
What if they had played Colin Baton Rouge at halftime of the 22 Tennessee game at Death Valley? It would have been the angriest Colin Baton Rouge ever.
And people would have found Brian Kelly's phone number and just started waving it back and forth.
Oh, God. That would have been awesome. Okay, speaking of Brian Denny, let's go to this one from the Saturday Down South Instagram account. This is Kevin Casey Reed, who submits Brian Denny. He says, Denny Chimes, $1 Million Band, Dixieland Delight, architecturally beautiful. I agree with that. We don't really talk about that as much. One of the best atmospheres in all of college football, a jumbotron in each corner, the home of the overall best program in college football. I'm sure that won't upset anybody by saying that.
Yeah.
Look, I think it's, as we were just talking about, it's really hard to rule out the success factor and what it does to fans. Maybe if Alabama goes 6 or 7 years without a title, like maybe, we're in year 3 of the DeBoer era, year 4 of the DeBoer era, and they haven't tasted that title since 2020, a year in which they couldn't all be in the stadium. And maybe they feel that angst in a different sort of way. I hate to keep defaulting to that word because it does kind of create some of the tension in the stadium that you need. But looking at it from the outset and seeing the way that fans will always show up for those games, how much it means. We just talked about whether or not Bama can ever become a basketball school. Like, it's always going to be a football school to me. It would have to be such a significant change over the course of decades for that to ever change. Look, it has to be part of this conversation. It's probably not going to win, and Bama's success is probably the reason why.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's going to point to, like, the whole Nick Saban comments about staying through the fourth quarter, but, like, I'm here to tell you right now that, like, there comes a point where you're beating the snot out of a team, especially like an FCS team, where it feels disrespectful to still be in the stadium. This sounds mean to you, okay? I love this energy. Mind you, I'll stay in the stadium all day. Me personally, I'm not leaving. The bigger we're winning, you got to drag me out of there like dude from Wolf of Wall Street. I get it. But there was a point during that Auburn LSU game where we went this year in Death Valley. They were just smacking Auburn. I was like, I feel like a jerk cheering for every first down because there were so many. You know what I'm saying? And so that's the thing. If you're smacking everybody, if you're playing Kentucky, sorry guys, and you're up, 24 points in the first quarter, go home, mix in the water. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're not needed this week. Save your voice. Like, I hate to be that guy, but it's like it doesn't mean you're a loser if your team wins so much that you just say, you know what, you guys got it this week. You don't need me. That's fine. So, yeah, I mean, if my team's playing UAB and they're up 60-10, I'm not going to be like, oh, you're a fake fan. You're a fake fan. Now, if you got people even in overtime, like Heat fans, then you're a loser.
Then you're a loser. Yeah,
right.
I would agree with you on that. Summers Joe 14 says, Neyland Stadium. Where else can you boat to the game in the SEC? Dixieland Delight is a song about Tennessee. When the game is over, you have the Smoky Mountains 45 minutes away. I almost forgot about the best band playing Rocky Top at least 30 times a game. Go Vols. If we're just talking fight song that goes into it, it's hard to top Rocky Top. Is there any fight song in the SEC that you could hear on a college football Saturday that is more that you could find yourself just humming hours after the game more than Rocky Top? No.
Dude, when I went to Neyland back in, this was the Butch Jones year. It happened to be the game that LSU beat Butch Jones. I was like Coach O. But I wasn't there for LSU. I was there for Saturday Down South to go shoot some sponsored content. And I just remember like the joke being like me pulling up beautiful. I mean, coming through those mountains, oh my God. Like it looked like Valhalla. You're pulling up and it literally looks like a mountain. And you get 2-3 miles out and you just hear. And I'm like, oh my God, they're playing Rocky Top, this rules. I like put it on my sound system in my car. I'm like, oh yeah, Rocky Top, this rules. Brother, they got smacked by LSU. The stadium was like, let's call it 3/4 full. Butch Jones was fired already, I think, actually. And they had a big banner of Butch Jones. I remember seeing that we had to cut out a video because he was already fired. And the whole time, I mean, are you changing? Is a timeout called? Is the grass growing? is there like what's going on? All right, guys, play another one. And by the end of it, I was sitting there like there's a famous diner that I got. I'm sorry, I forgot the name of it, but I was just saying my ears were like I couldn't get it out of my head, and I was mad. And literally, someone we interviewed that day just goes, "You're gonna hear Rocky Top 1,000 times. You're gonna know the words of that song. You're gonna question why some words are in that song." I love that so much. I think it's awesome.
Look, I have a buddy who, my buddy Bronson, one of my best friends in the world, went to Iowa, is somebody that if it's not his team, he really doesn't care. Like, he will tune out a team if it's not relevant. He just is he's like, I mean, you can call him like kind of a fair weather fan. He loves sports, absolutely loves sports.
He's a sports fan, is what those people are called.
Yeah. I mean, look, he will tune out a bad like Iowa football season, or if like, you know, if he was like very into Loyola before they got hot because he went there, he like finished his college there and was all over those Loyola teams. But like when they're bad, he's like, he doesn't care. When it comes to Tennessee, he took a trip to Tennessee and went to 2 games, went to back-to-back home games. He stayed there for 8 days.
Oh, yeah.
And the first thing he did after leaving Neyland was say, when do I come back next year? That's a guy that doesn't have a dog in the fight, has no interest whatsoever in specific SEC teams or anything like that. But he, as somebody that, look, I have seen him tune out things so regularly, but he thought to himself, I must get back here to this place, in this place that is not close to where I live in Chicago. I need to get back. Let me book my trip for next year. That's about as good of an endorsement as one can get.
Yes, and I'll say just a quick run on the songs, right? We talked Tiger Stadium. They have Call in Baton Rouge, or Neck, which is now an outlaw. If UConn does it, it's fine, but if LSU does it, it's a felony. For Bryant Denny, we have Dixieland Delight, which I want to be clear, Dixieland Delight rules. Dixieland Delight is an incredibly catchy song.
It's a banger.
I will play it. I don't care. I will play it. I think it's a cool song. Whatever. I'm not screaming it or anything, or adding in the ad libs like I do with Family Tradition or Quavo or something. But I'm singing along. And then we have kind of a custody battle here for Dixieland Delight because it is a song about Tennessee. It's in the song. Don't get mad at me. All right. It doesn't say the word Alabama in the song. It says the word Tennessee. But for Tennessee fans, they're like, you could have Dixieland Delight. We got Rocky Top.
Yeah, fair. All right, we got another one on Neyland here. This one is from Jacob Hayes. Jacob says, caused a great many false starts against Alabama in 2022, as well as against Florida. In addition, both games were sold out. In 2023, when Georgia came to town, we scored on the first play of the game. It was the loudest it had been since Alabama. Yeah, that run, that 75-yard touchdown run, unfortunately, that was the highlight of the day for Tennessee, and it was downhill from there. But to all the points that we just met, we already hit on this enough. If you're going to be a great stadium, you have to cause false starts as well. That's an important part of this. You have to be a significant Vegas move the line type of advantage. Neyland is 100% for most teams that aren't named Georgia at this stage of the game. Let's be honest. Okay. Anna G. Sylvie says, Jordan-Hare is the best stadium because the voodoo magic it holds, because number 1 teams can go in there. I think she means can't go in there. Oh, well, they may come out just fine, but most of the time they come out not number 1 anymore because Auburn knows how to rock a stadium or damn Eagle. It's hard to argue with the voodoo.
Yep.
The great thing that Jordan-Hare has that every team would like to have at their worst is that moment where you wonder, is something happening here? Is something happening that shouldn't be happening, and it can only be described within the confines of these walls?
Yep.
I think Willie B has that. I think Jordan-Hare absolutely has that. The fact that it didn't actually go their way in the Iron Bowl this year felt very un-Jordan-Hare-like. I mean, Nick Saban himself said that. When the greatest coach of all time gets into these moments and says, it's just not going to go our way, that's a sign that a stadium's pretty darn good.
Yep. I fully agree. And like that was the the second caveat, that was the other one I put in there, which is that we'll show out whether we will show out whether we're having a great season or an absolutely abysmal season.
Yep.
And the Eagle fight's awesome. That's exactly when I was talking about a floor raiser. I was actually talking about Auburn, because I think it's crazy because we've seen two not Basura, but mid to mid minus teams go to overtime. I mean, like the one team, the Brian Harsin team, right, that almost beat Alabama. Then we have a comeback around. We got a Hugh Freeze team that's also mid. They almost beat Alabama. And these are two Bama teams that are like really good Bama teams. Like teams that, made the playoff, like did all that. And it's the fact that, and that's why I find myself, like I talked about, sitting there in Amsterdam watching this game at 1 a.m. outside of a bar, because I feel like I've seen it before. And the thing that's crazy about both of those moments that I just described, not even close to the craziest thing I've seen from Jordan Hare, which was take your pick. The kick six was crazy, insane play. I understand. To me, the craziest Jordan Hare play was the Georgia game, where that actually put Auburn, the Prairie Jordan Hare, yeah, that actually really put Auburn there too. It had the double doink bounce and the one-handed catch to win the game. I mean, that's one of the most insane football plays I've seen. And so, yeah, like it's crazy it's viewed as the second craziest play of that season because of the kick six. When you think about what the kick six was, it's really just a kick return. A great play, best play in college football history. Okay, best play in college football history, kick six. But the most difficult play, it wasn't even number one that season at Jordan.
Yeah, and I think the last few years you could probably find a handful of tough times if you look at the way that the crowd filtered out after just getting demolished by Penn State in that game. Penn State
was a bad time. Yeah, but that was also like a Harsin thing. It was like, this guy's a clown, which, correct?
Yeah, and then later in the year, though, is one of my favorite moments that we've seen in an SEC stadium in the last 10 years. Having All the Above, an all-time underrated song that should be played in every single stadium, is the ultimate hype song. I have loved All the Above since
like the auto tune, like
2008. Yeah, with T-Pain, with Mano. 2008 Connor was all over All the Above. Shout out to my college roommate Craig Rack. He's the one that got me into that. Oh, yeah. But that song playing, and it's Cadillac, and it's a game that is so irrelevant with A&M in the grand scheme of things. But because it's Cadillac doing this, and because of the year that Auburn has had, the perspective to make that an unbelievable atmosphere. There was no better atmosphere in college football that day than Jordan Hare Stadium for a team that was going nowhere. And to me, that is the sign of a great stadium when you can create this. It's not just simply that you have this majestic eagle that flies through and just creates this unique scene that everybody is just gazed at. Is what do you do in those moments between the lines? What do you do in those moments afterwards? I think Jordan Hare, part of any sort of discussion. I'm tempted to name Jordan Hare the winner, but I don't think in the spirit of this argument, we got a good enough pitch for Jordan Hare.
Okay.
We could go about this a couple of ways. We could come up with a pitch that satisfied you and a pitch that satisfies me.
Let's each pick one.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay, so why don't you start? What was the one that stood out to you that you want to go to bat for and say that won you over?
As I'm weighing all of these, I think I am going to go Jordan Hare. I think that when you think about the voodoo magic, I think is a cool part of it, and I think that for me, it's between, again, can't say Tiger Stadium for this list. It's between Neyland and
I'm considering Neyland as well. Yeah.
Yep. I think it's between Neyland and Jordan Hare. I feel the 1-star reviews, but again, to me, the Rocky Top thing is very cool. I will say that. But for Jordan Hare, here's the difference: when Gus was at Auburn, they were consistently beating Alabama at home, kind of because of Jordan Hare. And they would go on the road and play like trash. Like there was not really a game in there, but you could look at, go up and there's a couple there at Tuscaloosa where they won or got close to winning. But the stark differences between, okay, we're at home, we have Gus. Gus has just invented a football play that no one's ever seen or will see ever again. That era where he was like holding serve with Nick Saban. Because if you look at Auburn, you could see a team that truly has no hope. Because they play Georgia and Alabama every year, and they get them on the road the same year, and they get them at home the same year. And furthermore, you're going to be playing as long as Nick Saban is there. I'm not saying going forward, but the whole time Nick Saban was at Alabama, they were playing for second fiddle in their own state which is not that recruiting rich of a state. It's not like a Texas or a Florida. So when you look at what Auburn's goal is and how hard it is to actually make Auburn good, you talk about the boosters and all this different stuff. The fact that specifically Gus was able to come through and say, okay, we know we got to play Georgia. We know we got to play Alabama. We know we got all these disadvantages. We know we're thought of this like kind of humble Alabama school, like the ag school. But we are going to beat the brakes off of you at home. We don't care what else has happened this season. We don't care who our quarterback is. We don't care if we don't have a receiver who hadn't caught 2,000 yards since the Clinton administration. We're going to come in here and we're going to run a play with a fullback that you've never heard of in your life. And Bama fans are going to be throwing shoes at their TV. And I think that in itself, 10 games I could list for Jordan Hare that when they were great, this is why. When they were rough, that's why they had something to smile about.
Yeah. I think all that's fair. I really do.
And the Eagle, sorry. That was mentioned. I didn't say that. The Eagle freaking rules.
It does. It really does. Even Bama fans, you can admit that Eagle's pretty cool. It's objectively awesome. If Auburn were in any other conference, I think Jordan Hare's my winner. I really do. And I haven't necessarily seen a bunch of stadiums in the ACC and Pac-12. I've seen a ton in the Big Ten, obviously, as well. But it would be my winner, and I think every other conference. But I will instead go with, and this is me, not Will saying this, I'm going with Christus Pitch for Death Valley. I'm going with LSU because I have seen over the years how many people have experienced it, and then the way that it is talked about after the fact of, hey, you need to see this place, and when it is rocking, it will be unlike any experience you have ever had, any concert, any sporting event that you have ever been to. This will be that. And I know Mickey Jeremy shared the Scott Van Pelt. This is what Scott Van Pelt has said about it in the past. Andrew DiGiacomo shared that there's been a poem about this place. This truly magical place that, look, I've been fortunate enough to see some unbelievable stadiums in this sport. In going to Tiger Stadium, experiencing Death Valley was an experience that I will cherish forever. And think that anybody, if you have ever gotten excited to watch college football, no matter who your team is, I would recommend being able to go there and see the way that place gets down. It's not just the tailgate, because the tailgate is incredible. It's awesome. Yep. And I'm trying to rule that out because that's probably a separate thing that we're going to talk about at some point here. So I don't think that can be just what you're known for if you're going to be considered the best stadium. But to me, man, you see the pregame buzz and how much people build up to these moments and what that place sounds like when those good moments happen. It is so unique. It is so unbelievably unique. So I'm okay that we're split on this first one, because we're gonna try and be as objective as possible. We don't want to just default to what Will likes, which is perfectly fine. We'll have our biases out there. So it is Jordan Hare for Will. It is Tiger Stadium for Connor. I don't think we're gonna get too much hate for that stance. I would have no problem with a lot of these other ones, but I think those are the two best.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll say this about Tiger Stadium. Like, if you want, before you die, go to one SEC rivalry matchup at night at Tiger Stadium. It is truly, like, you will say things you've never thought to say before. The slander will come out of your mouth once you get a couple of those, like, drinks in you, once you get around the people that are being really creative, once you start dapping people up. It's like a organized mob, and I love that. It's the fact that everyone's kind of playing their part. It's the fact that everyone's letting their mouths be known. Just like, walking by Mike the Tiger, I think is cool. So again, it's not getting any campaigning. Everyone's already made the case for me, but it's a cool place to just walk around and be a part of and know that all the civility that you get at noon that day is going to be gone by the time it hits 6 p.m. Central.
True. I will still say that the Swamp, 2018, that interception, that pick six is still the loudest moment I've ever heard in a stadium. 6 years later, I will still stand by that take. The Swamp probably should have had some sort of consideration for this. Maybe not as much banging of the drum for the Swamp when they're going through the times they're going through right now. But obviously when it's at its best, it's hard not to default to a place like that. But okay, that was the first edition of Pitch Me. We'll probably condense it a little bit moving forward. We don't want to necessarily be going for like 30, 35 minutes here at the end. But hopefully everybody enjoyed that. TBD and what we're going to do next week. But try and make these pitches, relatively condensed. We'll have all this stuff out there on social for you to be able to engage with. If you have not, leave us a 5-star review, subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch every single episode of the Saturday Down South podcast. Follow us on the app formerly known as Twitter at the SDS Pod, at Sat Down South, at CJ O'Gara, at Go So Hard. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.